Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conscious Business Connections, brought to you by the New York City chapter of Conscious Capitalism. My name is Bob Caporale, and I'm joined today by Mathew Lazarus, who is a partner in Heal Ventures, located in Brooklyn, New York. Mathew, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bob. Pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you. Really great to have you. So, Mathew, as you know, Conscious Business Connections is about promoting the idea of conscious capitalism. And conscious capitalism is a philosophy, more or less, that businesses can help elevate humanity. There's a lot of different ways that businesses can do that. So on this show, we want to highlight businesses that are practicing some of these things so that other businesses can learn from them and we could all help elevate humanity together. So that's basically what we're trying to talk about here today. So with that as the introduction, why don't you tell us a little bit about Heal Ventures and what you guys do?
Absolutely. Thank you, Bob. Big fan of conscious capitalism and excited to share. So Heal Ventures is our venture studio, which is a new model of entrepreneurship that sits at the intersection between founding your own company, venture capitalism, accelerators, and incubators. And so what we do is we build companies that are focused specifically in mental health and wellness. And these are ideas that we spin out internally based on some of the research, insights, and data that we uncover. And we also collaborate with domain experts and smart founders in the field to empower them with the infrastructure, the skills, and the resources to help amplify their efforts. And so we're focused, I'd say we're focused on a very conscious space. Namely doing what we can to reduce the human suffering and to elevate human flourishing for people in different areas of life, be it psychological, social, financial, sociological, environmental, and so forth.
Very, very cool. Very cool. So I imagine that some of what you're talking about may be foreign to some people, right? When we talk about things like, helping startups and venture capitalism and things like that, these are familiar terms, but a lot of people, I think, kind of associate it with your typical startup model where you have a software company is looking to go out and get money. How does your model differ or compare to that?
Yeah. So when most people think about entrepreneurship, they think, okay, I have an idea. Let me do what it takes to bring this idea to market, namely maybe by building an application or a product, like you said, software, and then finding customers or finding investors so I can continue to build it. What we do based on 7 years in the space is we looked at what are the biggest reasons why startups fail, 95% of them. And we realized that a lot of it boils down to validation and really putting our ideas to the test and testing or validating our riskiest assumptions. So the tip of the spear of our model is whenever we're evaluating an idea, we do whatever it takes to validate it by running experiments, either qualitatively and ideally quantitatively, to see what the market truly wants. What problems do customers really have? Because we're not in the business of inventing problems. Customers know what their problems are. Once we understand those, we're in the business of then being creative around the solutions and then validating those. So it's a cycle of very focused and rigorous validation until such point we look up and we have so much conviction because we have the data points that tell us this is where we want to place our bets. And then we bring in more and more resources and infrastructure to spin those out into standalone companies.
Got it. So you're helping really to solidify the model. You're not necessarily raising the capital yourselves, right? You're actually trying to solidify the model so that companies can raise the capital, or do you do the capital raising as well?
We do both. So yeah, we do both. And the whole idea is that our goal is to get an idea or a concept or a problem to be solved all the way to seed stage investment. So as a venture matures and it gets ready for that, we will support by bringing investors to the table. And ultimately, we are the co-founders of those initial businesses. So we're holding these founders' hands, or we're doing this for our own ideas, and then finding founders and teammates to support that.
Got it. So is it fair to say that your model is that you'll take some equity stake in some of these businesses as well as you help them?
That's correct. That's one of the ways that we align incentives to benefit all parties and stakeholders and whatnot.
Got it. So it's really important to you that these companies share values that you want to invest in, right? This makes it really important. So tell me why tell us why this particular space that you've decided to go into, the emotional well-being and the wellness space. Those are the companies that you're specifically focused on, right? Why is that important to you?
Yeah, so between, my journey as I grew up, and my father had multiple sclerosis.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, and it was part of what shaped and refined me in seeing my father, who had this autoimmune disease that effectively debilitated him as I grew up, and my mom was actually his caregiver. So witnessing my two parents and guardians working through their stuff, and it made me very aware of my empathy and my inner world and what was coming up for me, and also seeing where my parents didn't necessarily have the tools, or they did have the tools to operate in what was a very stressful situation and in some cases. So a lot of people talk about how adversity is the thing that refines you, and it's one of the best things that happened to you. That was a big contributor to my adversity. My business partner also after we had built our agency up and we're seeing all of this level of material success, he started to experience anxiety and greater panic attacks. And so we saw acutely, both like over time and acutely, how mental health influenced both our lives. And he looked to me and said, okay, where are some of what would you do? And so I started giving him suggestions. And at that point we realized, he started also talking to his other friends, and he started seeing a lot of people have anxiety, but nobody's really talking about it. So we realized that this is something that affects us really close to home. It affects all of our friends and family. And so it likely affects a lot of the people on the planet. And it's a matter of awareness and tools and support and listening. Listening is really the foundation of everything that we do. When I say validation, another word for that is asking questions, having conversations, and deeply listening to people's needs and truly empathizing with them.
So I want to ask you though, because you mentioned that you were part of an agency. So is it fair to say that you left the agency or shut down the agency or whatever it is to dedicate yourself to this new venture? So that's a pretty big life change, right? I mean, how have you found that transition to be?
Yeah, we decided that we wanted to shut down our agency, and we sold it to one of our partners who we had worked with. And at that point, we wanted, I wanted to take a break from everything and practice the opposite of high achieving, which is, it's an ancient term called doing nothing.
I love it.
And Bob, it was really hard.
Yeah.
It was really hard to just sit still, and despite the urge to do this or do that, to just be with my thoughts and be with myself, and read books. And even reading books is an aspect of doing something in productivity.
Absolutely.
So that was a big change, and I struggled with that, and it took time, and it took practice and patience to do nothing. And one of my friends has a saying, which is follow your highest excitement. And it's really hard to do that when you have so much moving and so much happening, and a lot of distractions, because you don't really have a way of listening to what your highest excitement is. Or I'll say for myself, I didn't have a way of listening to my own highest excitement. And so from this place of stillness and silence and rest, I could start to feel into what are the areas that I naturally wanted to explore and gravitate towards.
That's incredible. That's really amazing. And so this is where you ended up in this wellness space. Now, give us an example, because wellness, like any of these terms, right? It could be very, very broad. Give us an example of maybe a company that you've worked with or would like to work with. Like, what is an example of a company in the space that you would be working in?
Yeah, I mean, we're exploring many different spaces across the spectrum of mental health. And one of the ways that you can look at mental health is almost like a chart like a parabola that starts with people in reactive states where things are going bad, and how do they just get to baseline. There are people in the middle who are, may have light levels of anxiety or stress and trying to just find balance and homeostasis. And then people who've overcome, some of their greater challenges or are continuously improving and want to optimize and step into their highest self or actualization. So that's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is Maslow's hierarchy of needs when you think about food and security and esteem and love and fulfillment and so forth. And so we're looking at companies and we're talking with companies across each of these spectrums or spaces. For example, affinity communities, so communities of men or communities of women, and building conscious community. That's one. Another one is rehab and drug addiction, creating systems and marketplaces to better facilitate those interactions. We're also looking at the holistic wellness space or alternative wellness, functional medicine. There's an explosion of interest in that space. And while there are a lot of companies that are looking to capitalize on that, there's a lot of room to play there. And then one of the companies that we are focusing on and that we're building out ourselves is focused on understanding what are consumers' unmet needs when it comes to building the lifestyles and habits and aligning with their own values in their own daily lives. And that's been a beautiful exploration over the past few months. We've been interviewing these high achievers who are at different stages of these journeys, and we're identifying what are the different challenges that someone faces when they're stepping into a more conscious life for themselves.
Yeah, and I have so many thoughts on this because I do corporate training for a living. That's kind of my day job, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the companies I work with are bigger companies. And I see a lot of them are starting to move towards, even before those of you who may be watching in the future, we're right in the middle of this COVID crisis, right? So of course, everyone is familiar with that. But even before that, a lot of the companies that I am working with, they're starting to get into the mindfulness space. So whereas before I would go and just deliver a standard corporate class, they've been sent to a class because they have to learn something. Now I'm being asked to incorporate mindfulness, literal meditation sessions into the classroom. So right after lunch, right before breaks, whatever else. And of course, a lot of the people come in and they're crossing their arms and they're like, oh, we don't want to do this. But then you do it and you see this kind of stillness. It changes the entire environment of the room and the entire environment of the class. And I think people are starting to catch on that these things are important, right? And then, we take this current COVID crisis, which I want to get your impressions on. I think a lot of people are starting to realize that this idea of, jamming into a subway or jamming into a train and commuting 2 hours a day, and maybe there's a different way and maybe there's a healthier way to still make money, but not necessarily do it at the expense of your own well-being. What do you think about this? What do you think is going to change after COVID? People start getting back to normal. Do you think there's going to be more of a demand for this wellness space that you're interested in?
I do. The way I look at COVID is that it's the great shake-up to wake up.
Right.
And when you talk about mindfulness, what I hear is that people are getting a taste of what is it like to slow down, to close their eyes and to relax. And it's challenging this notion that when we work, we have to put on an appearance that we're on high alert. And scientifically, this high alert state correlates with fight or flight.
Right.
And very much so a mentality of being defensive or aggressive. And that's how corporate culture has largely been defined over the last 50 years.
Right.
So when you go in there and get them to close their eyes and get them to start to modulate their breathing, call it meditation, call it intentional breathing, whatever you want to call it, you're actually triggering physiological responses that cause deep shifts in the neurology and in the state that a person is in. And so even scientifically, when someone's in a fight or flight state, we all know what it feels like. When we close our eyes, we go into what is known as a rest and digest state, or a parasympathetic nervous system state, where we're open, we're more creative, we feel less separate, we feel less fear. And when it comes to decision making, and in my opinion, not even opinion, in my experience, decision making is the single-handed most important thing that a team or that a person needs to be in a good position for, and they need to be supported around. And if you're stressed out and you're in full of fear, that's going to influence your decision making to the point where you might not even be aware of how those things are affecting your decision making. But when you slow down, you relax, you open up your perspective, you get a wider lens, and you're able to make smarter, clearer decisions. And you even can change how you look at failures, and you can reframe them as growth opportunities. And it overall makes for a much better collaborative or partnership oriented workplace, as opposed to a dominator or fear-based.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And this is the way I see it. I mean, you talk about your dad and the way you grew up. These things influence us as kids, right? And as a kid, for me, I can tell you, we grew up on Long Island. My dad grew up commuting 2.5 hours each way to his workplace. And I could tell you, on weekends, this was not a happy man, right? This was not, he was a wonderful man. But this was not a happy man because of that. And okay, in that day and age, maybe it was different, but today companies have a different way. And I just can't help but think that coming out of this COVID, you say that the shake up to wake up, I think it's absolutely right. I think there's going to be a big demand for businesses that can help companies navigate these new waters, because we've all become used to working a different way. And I think for a lot of us, it's a lot more pleasant, you know? So.
Yeah. One of my friends is working on a desk that's optimized for working from home.
Yeah.
And that's one example. I work with a team that's working on remote collaboration tools and everything that's required on that. And I mean, you're right. The biggest shifts come really quickly.
Yeah.
Someone had a quote, I think it was Lenin. Decades happen in a decade's worth of change can happen in a week's time.
That's right.
And that's what a week's worth of change in decades time. We're looking at the former in that. And the humans also don't like change. We don't like uncertainty. We are creatures of habit. So it's up to the innovators. It's up to the people who thrive in chaos and can dance on that frontier, and are bridge builders who can work with these large organizations who are inherently incentivized to focus to work on to leverage the status quo to maximize their profit and to maximize their efficiency, to look outside and to collaborate and to insource entrepreneurship from without and within, to increase their own capabilities when it comes to validation and listening and conversating with their customers.
Yeah. And I think, back to conscious capitalism, there's a different way to get to profit, right? And if you get to profit through humanity and people and paying attention to those things, I just think there's going to be a big demand. And, I can get very philosophical here, but you wonder if these big shakeups aren't kind of collectively we're doing it ourselves, right? Because things need to shake up, but that's probably too deep for this show. But in any event, I think what you're doing is absolutely incredible. I think it's really cool. And I think it's really cool that you shifted your own life to dedicate yourself to this, what I think is, by the way, going to be a very growing and very, lucrative space, but more important, a very important space for people's health and well-being. So it's really, really great. Mathew, I don't want to let you go without you telling our viewers, our listeners, our audience, where they can find out more about Heal Ventures. Where can we find out more about your company?
Healventures.co.
Got it.
Co.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's the place to go. You can learn more about us. You can reach out there. We're very open and transparent in terms of reachability. We're not here to hide anything. Our goal is to open source a lot of the research and data that we find. So if anyone else is interested in this space or they're working in this space, we welcome collaboration, and we're involved with a greater ecosystem of mental health and wellness innovators and creators. So we're always connecting those dots, because we believe in it. I don't like the term networking as much as I like the term community. And it's really that natural ecosystem where we're planting different seeds, we're connecting different networks or communities, and creating more diversity and more richness that makes the entire system less fragile and better suited to evolve.
So cool. Really, really cool. Well, I'm sure people will reach out and go out and check that out. So it's really fantastic. So before we end the program, I also want to make sure I do a shout out for the sponsors of the New York City chapter, the Tomiak Foundation, the Core Club. Without their generosity, programs like this would not be possible. So thank you to both of those sponsors as well. And with that, Mathew, I want to thank you. Really, thank you so much for joining. It's been a great conversation. Really a pleasure, and best of luck with everything. I know it's going to be a really great, great ride for you.
Thank you, Bob, and keep up the great work. Just by spreading this truth, speaking this message, singing this song, it means a lot to the listeners, I'm sure, and just the entire, just the entire space of conscious capitalism. So I really appreciate your guys' work.
Oh, awesome. Great. We'll do what we can. So thank you. And thank you to the audience for tuning in again. If you liked what you heard, you learned something, please go ahead and give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Spread the word. This is all about continuing to spread the word of conscious capitalism. There is a different way towards profit. So hopefully you'll tune into future episodes and learn about that as well. Until then, we'll see you back here on another episode of Conscious Business Connections. Thanks for joining.